You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 266, Age of the Republic, Part 1. Tonight, we're going to be breaking down some of the story and character elements found in the recent Age of Republic comics for Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker. And had we been smarter folk, we probably would have made this episode 266, or actually used episode 266 to do Order 66, but here we are. And speaking of being here, I am joined tonight, as always, by Jonesy. And Jonesy, if you had to pick between the balance, mission, and the sacrifice as your nickname, which one would you go with?
Oh, God, it would have to be the sacrifice. Because
I already took that one.
Oh,
so you've got, no, I'm kidding. Balance and mission left.
Let's do mission. Because you can put something at the end of mission space, mission impossible.
I had you pegged as balance because of the Van Halen song and how much or the album.
You know what? That's a good one too.
Yeah. All right. Well, enough of that. Let's talk about the news.
Very auspicious start.
Right. Yeah. Well, we got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. We're recording this on Friday, February 15th, and we'll get to the big one at the very end here. But let's start with some Star Wars Celebration news. We've got some more guests, and the Emperor himself will be gracing us with his presence. Ian McDiarmid will be there and signing autographs along with Brian Herring, who's the BB-8 operator, Mark Dodson, who played Salacious B. Crumb, Stormtroopers, aliens, and a host of other characters in the Star Wars movies. But let's start with Ian McDiarmid. I hear you are excited about this one, maybe?
Yeah, I am excited about him. These are these classic characters, and some of them, we've talked about this with like John Williams. We don't always know how many opportunities we're going to have to see some of these actors as they start to age. And so it's just really cool that he's going to be there. And that $110 autograph is a little tough to swallow. And you and I were
slightly
talking
more than I pay, or more than I charge, I should say.
More than you charge? Yeah. By about $108.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's expensive. And we were talking about before we came on air, the potential lines of what these guys, especially folks like Ian McDiarmid, will just be insane. And so it's going to be tough to do that. Although I've got this needle in my side that's saying you should just go ahead and do it, bite the bullet. You might not get this opportunity again. So just suck it up and do it.
Yeah, I don't go do the autograph thing. I think you and I both are in agreement here. We don't really go pester, the celebrities, whether they be Star Wars celebrities or sports stars, that kind of thing. But, sometimes when that opportunity is just there, you always second guess yourself and think, am I going to regret this later? But to your point, I don't know what these lines are going to be like. I've never stood in line for an autograph that I can even think of. I take that back. I've done it for Ernie Klein twice, and the lines were very, very small. So my reality is kind of skewed in terms of what's probably going to be like at Celebration.
See, and that's what I like too. I like it when the actors are not as well known. So when the Clone Wars first came out, they were on the circuit at I'll call them the smaller conventions. And so when we went to Plano, I think I've told the story before, when we went to Plano, we got to meet everybody. And they were so cool because they would just talk to you. So Ashley Eckstein and, everybody in the Clone Wars was there. And they were just so polite and friendly because they wanted to give us a good impression of the show and of all of them. And it was really cool. And we've, like, even Ray Park, man, we did it at Comic Palooza here in Houston, and Ray Park came out and like gave us a demo and hung out with us and talked with us and just did whatever. And those are the times it's really cool when it's just a little bit smaller and more intimate rather than these big giant sessions. So, in some of these other smaller ones, that's where I would prefer to be, because you get to know them just a touch better. I mean, they're not going to, spell all their family secrets or anything to you, but it's just a little more personal.
All right. Well, we'll keep our pulse on more announcements as they come through. But next up, we've got
Furious.
Yeah, I mean, it's like every week, and it's actually, I think this was less than a week since our last one that we got for this one. So, and of course, it's kind of cool that they gave him, a spotlight. He's not competing with some really big names there. So, We got Art of Rebels. This is came out of nowhere, really. It was announced that they're going to be doing an Art of book for the Rebels TV series. It's now over, of course, but I really am excited about this. One, because I've always been a fan of the show, a big fan of the show. I actually really miss Rebels right now. But two, the artwork is so much of it we know comes from a lot of the original concept art. So I think it's just going to be really interesting to see what they've done there and how much they pulled from it, and what, you know, even just the layout of the book itself. Are they going to be showing where some of the original concept art came from, and you know what there's like twists on it, or is it just going to be just the Rebels artwork? We don't really have a lot of details here yet, but we do know that is coming October 1st, 2019. Is this something you're going to pick up as well?
I think I am. You guys got me hooked on these art books when you guys started talking about it back with, I think, Force Awakens. But then when y'all did it for Last Jedi, I had to go get that one, and I'm in love with these books. I like them. I usually just forget to because they tend to be a little bit more expensive. But man, yeah, the animation books, I usually get really into those. And if they do this like they've done the other ones, there's going to be a lot of really neat little Easter egg type of items in there, and you can see the history and you know how these things evolve. And that's just, man, that's so much fun to hear and see that. And you know, Rebels was a pretty good show. And so you've got some invested in those characters. So it's really cool to see where they, you know, how they originated and how they came to be on screen, and, you know, what the original ideas and, you know, what else don't we know about them yet that seems interesting?
You know, another good Star Wars art book is the art and making of Star Wars: The Old Republic. So if you get a chance, check that one out.
Very nice. You know, speaking of Old Republic, when I got the collector's edition and you have that little book, you know, that gives you the history. The Chronicles, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot of fun too, along with the video series. So anyway, just because we have to throw a little Old Republic love in there every once in a while, or like every week,
whatever. Yeah. All right, let's talk about Master and Apprentice, because we got an excerpt finally. This is the Claudia Gray novel that is coming out later this year. And if you've not had a chance to go read this, I highly, highly recommend you do so.
Do it.
Enough to really whet your appetite and get you thinking about a lot of things. But you and I both read it within minutes that this was released. But big fan of this too as well, yeah?
Oh, yeah. This is what we want, right? This is the Qui-Gon story. The excerpt roughly is the council approaching him with an offer to join the council. Someone's going to retire, which is kind of interesting on its own, that people retire rather than just die. I mean, honestly, we haven't really talked about that before. Like, how do you leave the council? It's kind of like a Supreme Court justice. You know, you don't really hear about them retiring, but frequently. But and then the challenges that he's having with Obi-Wan, which was a bit of a surprise as well. And so, but man, a really good clip. And if this story is going to read like this, I think we're in really good hands with this story. Just a very, very brief excerpt of this, but I'm really excited about it. Did you get that excited about it as well?
Yeah, no, I did. And especially at the very end, because, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, because we had a conversation in Discord that I felt was probably a better place to do it. But just at the very end of this little excerpt, you get the sense that Qui-Gon is, I mean, it seems like he's almost bucking up against the council to some extent, to ensure that he can continue to train, you know, Obi-Wan, right? That the relationship there is that strong. So you don't know how much of him being a maverick is because of his affinity for Obi-Wan and wanting to stay with him and be able to kind of lead him and train him, or how much of it is just Qui-Gon being Qui-Gon and that's just his nature. I think it's going to be a healthy balance given what Claudia Gray's been able to do. I know she's going to have the utmost care with the characters themselves, but that's just an interesting dynamic now that, to be honest, I had never really considered, right? I just considered Qui-Gon very one-dimensional in this particular aspect, that he was just a maverick, and that was just in his blood, and that's how he always was. But we get a little bit more here, and that some of it may be deriving from him not wanting to go to the council, because if he goes to the council, he loses Obi-Wan as a Padawan, right? And they kind of talk about how in very rare instances do they still allow that to happen, but it's kind of unfair to both the Master Jedi and the Padawan to stay in that kind of a relationship. So it's almost like he's reluctant to join the council again because he doesn't want to lose that. He doesn't want to lose his relationship with Obi-Wan, which I think is a great dynamic in general. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, a little surprising, but that's cool. Yeah, it comes out April 16th, so almost exactly 2 months from when we're recording this. So you don't have to wait that long.
And since we've recording this one just a little bit late because of Valentine's Day and a couple other things are going on, but we have a Star Wars Resistance February 1st. We got a tweet from Steven Stanton saying that season 1 finally airs March 17th. So that is the final date. And it says it's going to give you a lot to talk about at Star Wars Celebration.
Yeah, interesting.
Was that it? Is that
quote,
nothing else in there? Yeah, it's a teaser for sure, but there was nothing else in that quote, right? Nothing else that came out afterwards.
Yeah, nothing. It was just a whet your appetite type of comment, and it was just kind of out of nowhere though. And so I thought that was interesting. What would be big enough for celebration that we would really get a huge buzz on it? So we'll see if they deliver on that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're probably getting pretty close to another Resistance catch up recap type of thing. So we'll have to see what the Resistance crew has been up to.
And on January 31st, Delilah Dawson had a quote in here about the Skywalker Saga book. The Skywalker Saga is going to be the most exquisitely bound Star Wars storybook you can imagine, with gorgeous art by Brian Wood and by words by me, retelling episodes 1 through, is that 7?
8.
1 through 8?
Yeah,
through the eyes of the Skywalkers themselves. We're talking space fairy tale style.
Yeah, a little interesting there at the end, but it's through the eyes of the Skywalkers themselves, which is a little intriguing. The stories largely have been through the Skywalker lens, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So is there something else below the surface? And we get a little bit of that with some of the comics these days, but it'll be interesting to see what that actually translates into. And of course, Delilah S. Dawson's, very accomplished as well. So if there's someone that's going to do a great job with this, I imagine it would be her. So we will find out soon enough what she's actually talking about.
Absolutely. And just quickly before we get into the main show, we do want to make sure to mention that if you guys are heading out to Star Wars Celebration this year, please, and you want to see us or just kind of meet up with us, we've got a webpage out there at eargluemedia.com/SWCC. You can go out there and fill out a quick little form, give us some information that we will not share. That will allow you to get some emails and updates from us on where we're going to be, when our show is, that kind of thing. So we're looking forward to meeting everybody out there. We're probably going to have some special treats for some of the people that attend the show, and maybe even the little get-together that we're planning. So we'd love to see you and love to hear from you. So head out to the website and do that. And I think we'll get that in the show notes at some point. I keep saying that, and it never shows up in the show notes. So we'll talk to our illustrious producer about that later. All right. Was that it? No,
Nope.
We got one more thing.
Yeah, the big news.
The big news today. Again, so February 15th, we've got two big announcements, but very similar. We've got episode 9 wrapping up officially. So all of the primary filming was wrapped up today. We got a picture that was tweeted out by J.J. Abrams, and it shows Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac just all kind of embracing in a hug. They're all dressed in their episode 9 garb. And there's been a lot of talk about what they're wearing and whose hands are where, and is this a fin sandwich or not, that kind of thing. So it was a really cool shot. And then not even, I guess a couple hours later, we got another update saying that the primary filming for Mandalorian has wrapped up as well. And we got a nice picture of a Mandalorian helmet that looks to be signed by, probably the cast and crew,
right?
As a gift to the director. I guess where do you want to start here? How do you feel about it's already finally over, and are you like me wanting the stinking title to come out now?
We need the title. Yeah. Yeah. So we're starting to get excited, and we start to get more activity. And what's funny, we get more activity with less activity going forward. So this is it's ready. It's done. Everything's in the books. They'll probably do some pickups later on, and of course all the post-production type of things. But man, we are getting close to actually having something tangible in front of us, and that's really exciting. We'll get a title soon. We're going to get a trailer or a teaser soon. So these are things that now are primed, and those are the next things that we can target and really focus on. So this is exciting news. I mean, it's good to see progress, and we're really not that far off. We're 10 months away, and this is gonna be here before we know it. And then the Mandalorian, what I thought was really cool about the Mandalorian, they had a picture of the helmet. Someone actually drew a Mandalorian on the front of the mask.
Oh, yeah.
You can see kind of in the lower left side of it. So we'll have this in the show notes as well. But man, that's really cool on there too. But Man, that one caught me off guard. I didn't expect to see Mandalorian wrapping this early.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're kind of targeting towards the end of the year as well, but that was a little bit of a surprise as well. And that one's got people pretty amped up. So I really looking forward to that and seeing what they come up with.
Yeah, me too. I think I guess what got me was Poe Dameron suspenders. So definitely gonna have to pick those up if they come out on the Disney store. But yeah, they both
your Marty McFly ones.
Yeah, right. I have to replace my Marty McFlys with those. So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for the news. Let's get into the main show. So we are going to be talking about 3 primary comics today as part of the Age of Republic series. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with what's going on lately here in Star Wars comic universe, we have a series of, it's kind of like a maxi run. I don't know. How many total are there? Like 7?
So 8? Age of Republic, there's 8. Yeah. And
8 total. Yeah.
And they're all one shots. So they're all a self-contained story. There's no connected tissue between Age of Republic. They're all just standalones.
Yeah. Right. Set in that kind of, that era of the Star Wars timeline. And again, tonight we're going to be hitting on the Anakin story, which is called The Sacrifice, Obi-Wan story, which is called Mission. And the last one is Qui-Gon Jinn, and that is called Balance. And so just kind of as a refresher in terms of what we're doing here, we're not necessarily going to try to go, panel by panel. What we want to do is kind of just touch on maybe some of the larger story elements and really tie that back to other things that we've seen, heard, maybe talk about the symbolism, that kind of thing. But we do want to say that there are a lot of people that went into obviously making all of these issues, but primarily the main focus here is going to be Jody Houser, who is the primary writer. She's come up with all 3 of these, and which actually is really I don't want to digress too much here, but I like this concept, this idea, and we've talked about this with Rian Johnson versus J.J. Abrams, right? Independently, both movies are amazing, but I always felt, and we've said this in the show, but I always felt like without that kind of common thread of having somebody that's just behind a storyline beginning to end, it can cause problems. And here, although these aren't sequential in any way, the idea, the fact that they have Jody Houser as the primary writer, there's a lot of the same themes that are happening. They seem very, very well connected and tied together and bound together. And she does a really great job, I think, with all of these. In terms of her writing styles. I think some stories were probably better than the others, but we'll talk about that here in a second. So, anything else you want to throw in there before we get into this?
No, let's dig in, man.
All right, so let's start with the Anakin story. So, just out of the gate, and I know where you stand on this because we're probably in the same area. This wasn't my favorite story, and I've heard some of the other reviews, just tweets. And I saw people really going on how wonderful this was, and so I was thinking, man, that's 3 for 3 now because I think this is the most recent one that came out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, this came out, I think, February 6th.
Yeah, so pretty relatively recent here. And so I was thinking, yeah, she's just killing this thing because every one of these are getting 4.5, 5 stars on these little tweet reviews that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's a bad story. It's just, and I'm just sorry, I'm going to steal what you said because you said it really well. There wasn't much in here, if anything, that was really new. Right? Nothing that we hadn't seen. Yeah. Exactly. A lot of what we've already come to know about Anakin, come to know about, his past and how he feels, that kind of thing. I mean, there were a couple minor things in there, but compared to the other 2, it just wasn't as eye-opening. And I don't want to say that we should expect that from comics because 9 out of 10 times we don't. The Vader series has been is definitely a standout. Poe Dameron's been a standout. But for the most part, they're great entertainment, but we're not really getting big revelations. And I wasn't going into this thinking I was going to get huge revelations in a one-shot comic. But compared to like the other 2, where there was something a little bit more substantial, I don't think it just holds up to it. So anyways, I've gone off about it, but your thoughts on this?
That's a great point. I mean, this is when you get a one-shot in particular, you expect to learn something new. You expect to have some sort of uniqueness to that episode, if you will, that you get a whole story arc within, 20 or 30 pages, whatever it is. But with this one, we've seen the story time and again across a variety of mediums, whether it was Clone Wars specifically, or if it was in a novelization like in Thrawn or something like that, where we've seen this Anakin. We know this Anakin very, very well. So generally speaking, this episode or this issue, it takes place kind of right before the Revenge of the Sith era. So to picture that Anakin, if you will, but still a touch on the younger side of that look, if you will. So he's still very much getting used to being a leader in the Grand Army of the Republic. I don't know. They didn't really specify he was a general or not, but he's still, coming to terms and with the leadership in the army, with Yularen in particular in this episode or this issue. But it's still the same Anakin we just know super well. He's impetuous. He's impatient. He thinks with emotion. And we missed an opportunity to learn something new about it. But to be fair, when we looked at these episodes, or these, I keep calling them episodes because that's just how I equate everything. When we look at each of these issues, you see the opportunity for this to happen quite often, especially with characters that you know really well. And so the Anakin and the Obi-Wan one in particular, I think were the ones that were most likely to fall into this trap, if you will, where you don't really learn anything new because we just understand them so well. And there aren't that many surprises. Even with Vader, it wasn't so much that they were surprises about where he was, but it was just adding layers to them. And I didn't feel like we added any layers with this story for Anakin, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's just talk a little bit about the story. So I guess for those of you who have not read it, you got some context here. But I mean, it starts with kind of a space battle, and we get to see good guy Anakin, which was kind of cool. I always enjoy seeing good guy Anakin.
Yeah, heroic Anakin's fun. Yeah.
Yep. And then it cuts over to Anakin and Admiral Yularen kind of having a conversation, and really, he's kind of faced with Anakin is faced with, I guess, a moral decision, if you want to call it. But basically, the Republic can wipe out this nearby droid foundry, and they can do so before more reinforcements from the droids come. And the idea here is that they can just from far away wipe out that base, destroy the separatist droids and the foundry that are, or if they wait, they know that there's some what are they called, the Zudon or
Kudons, yeah.
Right. So there's this alien race called the Kudon that are apparently have now taken sides with the droids and the separatists.
Yeah, they were neutral previously. In the eyes of the Republic. Yeah.
Right. And Anakin's got this it's weighing on his conscience because he's thinking, okay, yeah, but we're going to kill all these innocent people. And, Yularen is saying, war is hell and it's ugly and unfortunate, but sometimes people die and that's just the way it's going to have to go. Right. And so he's kind of struggling with this, going back and forth. Do I wipe out all these droids, the droid factory and the Kudon, or do I try to rescue them? In rescuing him, the risk is that the other reinforcements may get there, and in exchange, he may end up losing clone lives, right?
Right.
So he's kind of having this struggle, this internal struggle between what he should and shouldn't do.
Right.
And it's about that moment that I guess Obi-Wan shows up, and Obi-Wan kind of has a talk with Yularen. He comes and talks to Anakin, and he assures Anakin that no, Yularen doesn't sees your side clearly, even though he comes across as kind of a jerk, Yularen, and that's not uncommon for him. He always seems a little brash at times,
right,
or brash at times. But anyways, he
doesn't have the ego, that usually goes with the leadership.
Yeah, and he's Mr. Imperial, right? I mean, he's right. He goes on later, and we see him in A New Hope and all that. So I mean, he's always been very well dedicated and loyal. Kind of takes orders without really questioning things. So that doesn't seem like it would. They don't seem like they would align very well, him and Anakin, to begin with. But yeah, so there was one nice little moment here when he's kind of thinking about what he should do. Right. And I think this is after. I don't know if it's after he speaks to Obi-Wan or not, but he makes the comment that he would rather just fly. And this isn't, and again, even though it is something we've seen before, but this is another example of Anakin where he gets into these situations where he's got to make these really hard decisions, or it weighs on his conscience, and he tends to go back to the things he knows and loves to do, whether that be flying or building robots or just getting his hands dirty, whatever it is. This is his escape, right? Right. Which I think was just kind of nice because we don't really get to see a lot of that. Obviously, he's always so gung ho, especially in the Clone Wars, and then we get very little in the movies of this. But I thought it was a neat little touch of him just saying, you know what, I'm going to get away. I just want to go. I wish I could just fly. I don't want to be a general. I don't want to be a soldier. And some of this kind of speaks to his maturity at this point, like you said, because this is shortly after Attack of the Clones, but not up to where we see him in Revenge of the Sith. Right. So yeah, he's pretty young. He's pretty immature.
I think there was a good moment though of potential growth where right before he says he'd rather fly, he's asking the question, is this what leadership does in a war? make impossible choices. And that's a pretty profound statement because it's so true. You have to make these, it feels like everything is lose-lose sometimes. Even when you win, it feels kind of like you lost, right? Because you've had to sacrifice something, even if it's for the greater good. And that's something that Anakin has always struggled with. And he's not capable of making those choices. He'll make the decision, but usually it's for either, you can call it self-serving or something, far more protective in nature. And so, but it was good to at least have him ask the question in a moment of thought. And so I thought that was a nice moment though, with that right before he said, yeah, I'd rather just fly. Yeah.
It's right after that Obi-Wan shows up and, reaffirms that Yularen is, saying that they're both correct in their viewpoints. But Anakin gets upset here. I mean, he slams his fist down at one point on the table when he's questioning the purpose of the Jedi in this war. He says, aren't we here to save lives? And he gets angry, which I thought was kind of profound that he would get that angry about it without really a whole lot more than that. But he makes a comment here saying that slaughtering people like this is just wrong. And you get a rush of like
the irony.
Immediately. Yeah. I mean, the irony of that line of hearing Anakin saying slaughtering people like this is just wrong. You get, Tusken Raider families, younglings, other Jedi, Alderaanians, just kind of all dying in unison when you hear this. But I mean, it just sounds very hypocritical of him. And all joking aside, that line is significant because he says that he learns that from Obi-Wan Kenobi, that you can't just go slaughter people, that it's wrong to do so. And there's so much conviction in his words here that he certainly, I mean, it adds to the struggle and the conflict that we see him go through when he's turning to the dark side and later on when he fights, Obi-Wan on Mustafar and again in the Death Star.
Yeah, and I think, at first, my first reaction when I saw that was definitely the Tusken Raiders because that wasn't that long ago in this timeline.
Right.
But I think some of that is also him learning from that situation and looking back on it and knowing that it was wrong. I mean, we saw that on screen too, that he knew it was wrong, even though he was angry and he was happy he did it at that moment. But looking back, he knows that's not the Jedi way. He knows that's not what they're supposed to do. Yeah. And I think this conversation with Obi-Wan in particular was interesting that he continues to put the duties of being a Jedi above the duties of being a general. And I think that's something that Anakin has always done. And we saw that throughout the Clone Wars in particular. And I think that consistency is good to see that's what matters most to him is protecting and is saving lives above victories and really even ending the war in totality. There's still some sort of core value to Anakin that he is trying to adhere to, even if he gets off that path, somewhat frequently.
Yeah. No, and I've always thought it's the young Annie that is saying that people don't help people anymore, right? That seems to be something that stays with him throughout his whole life. Even you could even argue into the original trilogy to some extent, but yeah, I think that little kid there and that honest, earnest feeling of I need to help people supersedes all of the other stuff, whether it be Jedi, General, that kind of thing, right? His heart is there.
Yeah, and the defiance, right? When I'm not a slave, I'm a person. And we get that raw emotion when he actually goes to the foundry and sees what's really going on there.
Yeah, so he gets there and finds out that the Kudan are they've been enslaved. And the Separatists are hoping that the Republic would just open fire, slaughter them, and they can just use that as, propaganda that, look, see, these guys are the bad guys, and hopefully turn the Kudan and anybody that's, friends of the Kudan over to their side and against the Republic. And it's interesting because when he shows up there and he sees this, right, he's like immediately triggered. We get these flashbacks of him looking back and he's remembering himself as a slave. There's an image of Shmi Skywalker standing there and she's, a slave. It looks like what we saw her in episode 1 and a little bit of episode 2 there, but he's triggered and just slaughters all these droids. Right. But the other part of it then is once he slaughtered the droids, there's this interesting panel where it shows him with his lightsaber off to the side. And you've got the Kudan standing there. They're in shock and in fear because he just went and mauled all these droids with seconds. And it's very similar to the shot from Revenge of the Sith, and it's almost drawn the same way. I think the only difference is in the movie Anakin's got the lightsaber hung off to the left, and in the background you can see the younglings. In this particular shot, it's over to the right, and in the background you see the Qui-Gon. And of course, they take different paths, right? He doesn't slaughter the Qui-Gon; he actually just frees him. So it was interesting, and I'm sure that was a very conscious decision in terms of an artistic conscious decision here,
right?
For the artist to kind of do that. But I did catch that, and it's pretty obvious. But I thought it was really neat that they went that far. But what did you think about Anakin's solution here at the very end of the comic? Because he frees the slaves, right? But then he tells them to pick up their weapons. But we don't necessarily see him jump back into the fray. He almost like steps back and tells them that, hey, you're not fighting for this war. You're fighting for yourselves. They pick up their weapons. They start firing at these oncoming droids. I guess this next wave or barrage of droids that are coming in. But I just got the sense of like, okay, so what did he do here? Did he not go back in and fight? Did he allow them to just fight their own war?
I think he participated, but
all right.
This is one of the things. I think he was with the ranks and led them in that. And
here's why I asked it.
Yeah, they were trying to wrap the story up a little bit.
Yeah, they probably will, and they do, because like it literally cuts right there, and next thing you know,
they're recapping
rolling credits,
getting the debrief,
getting the debrief, right? But the reason I asked that question, because it got me thinking, because of the Qui-Gon story that we'll talk about here at the very end, where he was kind of faced with a very similar situation, right?
Right. And
Qui-Gon acts as a true peacekeeper, where Anakin maybe doesn't. And Qui-Gon removes himself and that mistress lady all together, and there is no fighting. Whereas Anakin empowers him to fight, but it didn't look like he actually partook in it. But you could argue that he was essentially being a peacekeeper. He was empowering them to kind of fight their own war. But yeah, we don't get any sense one way or the other. But we just know that Anakin's back, and Obi-Wan makes the comment that, whether they join the Republic or not, they now have a choice, because he was able to kind of go in and save them.
Yeah,
so
you could probably count on one hand the number of times that Anakin did not get involved in a fight when it was right at his doorstep.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just, I think it was more about the way that panel was drawn.
Yeah.
Because Anakin just kind of steps back, and he's not leading, where I guess I would have expected him to just jump in front and say, you're going to fight this for yourself, but I'm going to be here with you. Let's do this kind of thing. And it's not at all. It's actually quite the opposite. He takes a step back, and those guys step forward. So anyways, I'm probably looking for too much in that. So
well, we were desperately looking for something in that story.
Well, and that's kind of it. That's really how the story ends. I don't know what. What's
fun about the next story we're going to talk about with Obi-Wan is that we get good character development for both Anakin and Obi-Wan. So
yeah, I would agree.
Maybe it makes up for it.
Maybe it does. All right, so let's talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, his is called Mission. And I just got to say this real quick. At the very beginning, I laughed out loud here, because it starts off, it says Jedi Temple, Coruscant, years ago. And I'm like, sure. I mean, I know all of this is years ago. There's the Age of Republic. I got to put it in context that, we're talking about a different period of time. Anyways, I just thought it was funny. But yeah, it starts off with some younglings that are meditating. And did you get the sense that was supposed to be Obi-Wan Kenobi at the very beginning there as a very, very youngling?
Yeah, not until I got to more of the current. And then I was like, oh, okay, that's who that was. I didn't know who it was at first. I thought it was supposed to be maybe Anakin at the time, until got a couple pages into it, and then flipped back and said, okay, yeah, that's Obi-Wan.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of cool. Kind of see him there. And there's one line that at the very beginning of this, there's a line that says, we must master ourselves before we can hope to master the Force. And that just feels like a mantra for a lot of the mistakes that were made by the Jedi in having, well, you could say that's a mantra for a lot of the Jedi in general, right?
Sure,
but here, relative to this particular comic or particular relationship between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Anakin, it just feels like this is a mantra for Obi-Wan training Anakin so young, and then having Anakin train Ahsoka so young.
Right.
Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a story, really, it's a relationship story between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and the guilt and the frustration of the situation that they're in, because it wasn't something that either of them chose, and that either one of them really felt like they had much choice in the matter of. Mm-hmm. And so it was very much how do they connect, and how do they grow from this point? And, what's happened so far? We get a little flavor of some of that as well, but yeah, very much. This is actually these are the stories that are really good because this is just a very small personal story, and we get personal conversation and candid conversation between the characters on the page, and that's what makes this one so much better than the last story we talked about.
And just quickly on, I guess this one takes place. This would be just right after the Phantom Menace. He's still got his little tail. He's very young here. He being Anakin, and obviously Obi-Wan is now his master, but Obi-Wan himself is still fairly young as well. It seemed like it was maybe a couple years after. So some time was, because he looked like he was not as young as what he was. Little shorter cropped hair. Maybe like 10, 11 years old, maybe?
That's probably my guess. Somewhere in there. Preteen.
There's probably a date out there. We just too stupid to look it up. But anyways,
years ago.
Years ago. So he's about that age, let's just call it 10 years old. So anyways, they're given this mission that they need to go retrieve this Jedi holocron that's been found on the planet of Dalinor. And as soon as they're given this mission, Obi-Wan goes and does what he does, which is go to the library and get cursed out by Jocasta and you. But Yoda shows up, and Yoda is the one that basically encourages Obi-Wan to take Anakin with him on this mission. And so this would be their very first mission together ever. And I got a sense here that Yoda knew what both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin needed, that they really needed to do more than just train at the temple, which we got a sense that that's all they've been doing, is just kind of doing this, safe training kind of stuff. And I think Yoda believes that in order for Obi-Wan to grow as a master and Anakin to grow as a student, that this mission together was necessary and almost essential, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Anakin's not like all the other Padawans in a lot of different ways, but even from just a very basic level, he's older than the rest of the kids. And I can tell you firsthand, there's nothing more frustrating for kids than to feel like they're being babied or they have to sit at the kids' table with the younger kids, right? So you got to imagine, on top of just, throw away the slavery, throw away all of the anger he felt from his mother, throw away all the stuff that he is as a Padawan, a Jedi, and the Force, just as a very core element as a child, having somebody this old hang out with the younger kids probably drove him crazy. And I think there was probably, Yoda's probably picking up on that and saying, you need to get this kid out of the house, and you need to get out there as well, because you're very limited in what you can do as a master in training, and you're not growing. You've got to branch out a little bit. And so he really pushes Obi-Wan to take him on this mission, which seems innocuous enough. It seems pretty harmless, right? Just go out there, pick up this Jedi holocron, and come right back. And of course, it doesn't turn out to be that way. But before we get to that part, go ahead.
Yeah, we sense that tension early on when Obi-Wan comes back after hearing about the mission. The first response from Anakin was leaving again. And you start to get these visions and he talks about some of the kids. Anakin views that he is so far ahead of these kids, but like you were saying with Obi-Wan and Yoda, their conversation, Yoda says that he's so far behind. And you start to have these flashbacks to what we heard from Anakin when he's talking to Padme in Attack of the Clones, where Obi-Wan's holding him back. He's not being forthcoming with his training. He's not letting him grow. And we see the seeds of that, the roots that really weighted all of that down years later, all started here, where it looks like Obi-Wan has been doing other missions and leaving him in the temple. Mm-hmm. And again, it's this rub of the relationship where they have this uneasy, balance between them. They don't know how to interact with one another because of some of the, just the baggage that they've got that we'll talk about here in a minute. But I think that it was really cool to see some of the seeds of what we saw later on, even though it was 5 or 6 years later as a teenager.
Yeah,
that really all start here, and then we've been going on for a while.
Yeah, and kind of pick up there. We get a lot of, well, there's not a lot, but we get a couple flashbacks in here that are really neat, because it's Obi-Wan thinking back when he was being instructed by Qui-Gon Jinn and remembering, what Qui-Gon was saying, what he was doing. There was one moment in there where we get a sense of, Qui-Gon being a rebel again, which is great, because that's what I was mentioning earlier, where Hauser just keeps hitting that theme that, Obi-Wan is a rebel, and he does kind of push, Qui-Gon is a rebel and a maverick, and really kind of goes against the grain whenever he can. But it's the very next scene that it kind of broke my heart, to be honest, because it's Obi-Wan and Anakin. They're kind of mid-flight on their way to Dalinor to go pick up this Jedi holocron, and they're sitting there and they're talking. when Anakin asked Obi-Wan about what his life was like before being identified as Force sensitive. And I like how we get to hear Obi-Wan talk about, the Jedi Council, that they're usually right about a lot of things, but they're not perfect. And he says this to ensure Anakin that he knows that Qui-Gon was right to ask that he be trained. But then it goes south when Anakin says he feels like Obi-Wan got stuck with him. And that's that baggage, I think, that you were kind of referring to here. There's this deep sense of almost abandonment that Anakin is still feeling, even with, having Obi-Wan near him. He's always gone. He's leaving. I mean, this is just kind of shades of Kylo Ren here, right? And Han Solo and Dad being gone again. But yeah, it was very eerie to kind of hear him say that. And there's that abandonment is what it just really stuck with me. And maybe even feeling like sensing that Obi-Wan really was unsure about training him on his own will, and more out of sense of obligation, right? You get a sense that that Anakin's picking up on that. You don't really want to be my master. I know someone told you to do that, and that's the only reason you're doing it. You're just going through the motions kind of thing. Right. And I'm probably looking too much into that one as well. But from a kid's perspective, that's a very hard concept to grasp, given their maturity about that. It's more than that, but it's very black and white for kids, and they can see that. They can see right through that sometimes. And I think that's exactly what was happening here.
No, that's a great point. And I think that's exactly right. He isn't able to interpret it, but he sees the conflict in Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's maturity isn't to the level of what a master should be. We don't know how long, if he would have taken the trials and become a knight, we don't know how long he would have had before he took a Padawan of his own. It doesn't seem like they take a very long time before they get one, but you figure there would be some opportunity. And you see the regret that Obi-Wan has, because he expected, by the time he had a Padawan, he expected to have Qui-Gon Jinn there to be able to guide him and give him advice and coach him along the way so that he could be a better teacher. And Obi-Wan feels like he's not prepared. He has this lack of preparedness to actually have a Padawan. And it's not that he neglects Anakin, but he is just so uncertain that he can do it properly. And he even made a comment in there, I couldn't protect my master. How could I be expected to protect a Padawan? Mm-hmm. And so he's afraid. He's just scared, right? I mean, he's still a young man as well, but you have to put some of that aside when you're talking about a youth that didn't have the same experiences. And Obi-Wan's smart enough to see that. And he understands that the experiences that Anakin have are very different. And that makes it even more difficult. But he has to get over that quickly, because it's not doing the Padawan any favors that way either. And it's just going to make it worse. And again, you get these rifts, not only between him, but between Anakin and the Jedi Council and the other Jedi. I imagine he's an outcast most of the time anyway. And especially when you get this whole chosen one thing, when that gets around, it's kind of lights out on your career of having friends.
Yep. So to pick up on the story, and the story here is really secondary, if not tertiary. It's like it's getting buried here in the lead here, but yeah. So they get to the planet. We get a hello there from Obi-Wan, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And come to find out that they get the holocron, and there's pirates basically that show up, and so we have a confrontation now between the pirates and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Anakin, who, lets his guard down, gets a sword put up against his neck, and then is able to use the Force to kind of hurl some rocks at this guy that's got him pinned and, knock him out. And again, this is all secondary stuff, but long story short is they finally come off they get the holocron, they leave the planet. And that's the ending of the issue that really pays off, I think, in my opinion, because it follows up on Anakin feeling like he was dumped onto Obi-Wan. And instead, it's Obi-Wan telling Anakin that he feels like he was dumped on him, that Obi-Wan feels like Anakin had a great teacher in Qui-Gon Jinn that could have trained him. And instead, Anakin got him, which right. Obi-Wan doesn't feel is fair to Anakin, right? It's almost like you deserved better, and I'm sorry that I'm who you got. And that's where that line comes in, where it says, and if I couldn't help save a great master, how could I save a Padawan? But do you almost get a sense here that Obi-Wan blames himself to some degree for Qui-Gon's death?
Oh, absolutely. And he says as much. I mean, he couldn't protect his master. So why would he be able to protect anybody else? And he feels responsible, like he robbed Anakin of a worthy teacher, of someone who would have been a fantastic teacher for Anakin. And he sees that. He sees these differences between them. And that's what makes the Master and Apprentice book so interesting, because it sounds like we might have a similar dynamic between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. And so it would be interesting to see how we view this later on when we get into that book in a few months. But yeah, he's very much, there's a lot of guilt for Obi-Wan here too. He's got all these insecurities, but also feels like, I'm not prepared for this. And it's partially my fault that you don't have the teacher that you should have had. But what's great about the conversation, though, is they have a very candid and transparent conversation. And this is how you make progress. If you think about any time in your life, whenever you have a more robust conversation where you lay your cards on the table and you do it and you're both in a place where you're listening and understanding, you make considerable progress. And I think that's what we saw here, to where the next steps for them as teacher and student and eventually as brothers, they've made a huge leap forward here, and of how they're going to behave and how they're going to interact and treat one another. It's not always going to be great, but they've made considerable progress just with this one conversation. And Obi-Wan finally releasing some of that guilt. And he has a great quote in there that he's not the teacher Qui-Gon Jinn was, but he's the teacher that Anakin has. And so that sense of responsibility and that sense of, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure that I train him the right way. And we saw that in some of the Morris conversation we had, that it hasn't always gone perfectly, and he still has some residual guilt. But at this moment, he made a promise, and he needs to keep that promise.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was one other line too that I do want to just touch on just very briefly, and I'm trying to remember who said this, but there was a line in there about they will save each other, meaning Anakin
said it. Yeah. So we'll save each other. Yep.
Yeah, he says we'll save each other. Yeah, sorry, thank you. And that line, it really stings now, because the idea of both of them starting off in the relationship this early on their very first mission together, almost like a pact, right? And yet we know it's going to all go horribly wrong later in life when Anakin, because of Anakin's fear and ultimately succumbing to the dark side. And it gets even harder to swallow, because at the next three parts of this, as the comic ends, is I may not be that teacher. What you said, I may not be the teacher that Qui-Gon was, but I am the one that Anakin has. The next one is, and I won't fail him again. I did make a promise after all. You couple that with, I have failed you, Anakin. I have failed you. You were the chosen one, right? That whole scene just stings even more. And then even in Return of the Jedi, when Anakin, when Obi-Wan's talking to Luke Skywalker and he says, Anakin was a good friend. I took it upon myself to train him as a Jedi. I thought I could instruct him just as well as Yoda. I was wrong.
And we had this, if you remember back to our unfinished Clone Wars episodes, we had this same interaction where it got really uncomfortable knowing what we know, when he said, you could never fail me, Anakin. Right. I will always be proud of you. And it's like, oh man.
Yeah.
It's just, you poor souls.
You poor souls. Absolutely. So yeah, this one's a really good one. It's got some really good moments in there, knowing what we know, right? Of things to come and how this doesn't really play out. It's very innocent and they get off on the right foot. You can tell. And we see that obviously all through the Clone Wars, where they're just gelling and they are brothers, which just, again, makes it more impactful when we get to Revenge of the Sith and what happens.
And we ask each other when we get these stories, is this a story we really needed to see, or that we really had to have, or is it just, kind of throwaway? And I think this is a really important small moment that really helps us understand the relationship at this stage of both of their lives. And I think this is a really valuable story to have as part of the canon for us to understand and to think through.
Yeah, I would agree. I absolutely like this one very much. So, okay. The last one is balance. And this one, so again, we asked this question is, do we learn anything here new, right? Are we getting anything from it? And Qui-Gon is just one of those characters that we don't have a lot of. So pretty much anything that we can get about him is great. It's just a bonus. And so I would say in this particular one, the story in itself stands on its own, but the fact that we get more of Qui-Gon and get a little bit more into his head, I think is just really great. I really did enjoy this one, probably the most out of all three of them here. Were you feeling the same way about this one?
I did. This is anytime, like you say, anytime we get Qui-Gon, it's something unique because he's just so devoid of information for us. We don't know his challenges. We don't know his insecurities. We don't know much about. We know about his convictions, at least at one moment in time, but we don't know really what made up to this one. And this story takes place because we really don't have much of a gauge because Qui-Gon is drawn more or less how we've seen him on screen, but Obi-Wan looks to be maybe 4 or 5 years younger, at least, than what we saw him in Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. So again, this is, they've been Padawan and Master for a little while, but it gives us a little bit of a grounding on when we are. But yes, this is another story that I was excited to see, and I'm really excited to talk about, actually.
Right. No, and one thing just quickly with Hauser, she really took the do no harm approach here, I think, with regards to Qui-Gon.
Right.
And some of that may just be out of respect of the character itself. But some of that could have just stemmed from being hamstrung with the upcoming Master and Apprentice novel. So it was, I think what she was trying to do here was give us enough without really impeding on elements of that and making sure that she doesn't muck anything up there. And given
I'm sorry,
that it's a one shot, I think she did a really good job of that.
Yeah. And this is the same type of thing that Charles Soule had said about the Vader series, was that he's not going to spell everything out for you. He likes to leave it ambiguous. And I like that Jody Hauser has still taken that approach to where we have a story that we can talk about, but there's still enough to where we can fill the blanks in and debate and have good conversation about it as well. And so I like that. And there's actually there's a few little parallels with the Vader comic series on this one, which I thought were really cool.
Yeah. So it starts with Qui-Gon Jinn in the midst of another skirmish, and he's kind of protecting this mistress. I forget her name now. I didn't write it down.
Ther, Ther, with an apostrophe in the middle there.
Yeah, Ther. So they're supposed to be, helping her, and she's got some very obscure opinions, or I guess skewed opinion of what the Jedi are supposed to be doing. At one point she says, "But you fought for me, you chose my side, I defended your life," whatever you made. And I'm sorry, I'm reading Qui-Gon's line here, but she thinks that the Jedi really are warriors, right, and they are there to slaughter people left and right. And Qui-Gon's in the midst of, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were sent here to kind of negotiate a peace treaty, which they seem to like the worst negotiators now. We've only had 2 instances now where they've sent these guys and neither one of them ended the way it was supposed to. But nonetheless, they send them to kind of negotiate, and things go south. And so rather than staying in the battle, Qui-Gon does what Qui-Gon does. He grabs her, jumps into the ship, tells Obi-Wan to punch it, and they head back to Coruscant. He just removes himself from the situation, removes the conflict altogether, and doesn't engage in it whatsoever. So, and that's just very much him, right? He does not want to be a warrior. He is there to keep the peace. And if keeping the peace means removing conflict by removing himself, then that's what he's going to do, which I think, again, is just very characteristic of him, is a very strong characteristic of him.
Right. And he understood the situation. He knew that there were 2 ways that this mistress more or less believes she's a tree guardian, if you will. And then the Metal Clan was trying to cut down all the trees. So kind of a weird story there, but he understood the situation to where there were 2 ways that this was going to go really south, and that the Metal Clan was going to win, because they were clearly the dominant party here. One was either she capitulated, she just said, "Okay, I'm going to agree, I'll sign a treaty, whatever that is," or with her blood. I mean, and it seems like that was actually that was very literal. That wasn't figurative at all. Right. It was literally she needed to die or spill blood, and then they would be able to kill the trees. By removing her from that situation, neither thing could happen, and they would buy time to find a different solution. So this is Qui-Gon again, taking the time, removing himself clearly, and there was a repercussion of that, of being called a coward, and she didn't think the Jedi were cowards, but it was this really smart thing to do, of understanding what you're in and what your options are and making the best choice. And again, things that we wish Anakin would do more often.
And they get out to Coruscant, and we get one of the really cool, moments here where Yoda confronts him. So he's kind of out there at the Jedi Temple now. He being Qui-Gon Jinn, he's kind of overlooking the city, and Yoda approaches him and senses that there's great turmoil in him yet again, which I thought was poignant. The fact that it's saying that he said it's happening yet again on him. And Qui-Gon seems to be more upset about being called a warrior than a coward, right? And, you're immediately reminded of Yoda's line of wars do not make one great from Empire Strikes Back. But I like the idea that when Luke and Yoda are having that conversation, I like to think that Yoda is kind of pulling from this encounter as well, right?
Yeah, agreed.
This whole conversation is really about that. And I think this really shows his level of maturity and understanding of the Force and how unbalanced the Jedi or Force users in general can make things should they be allowed to their own devices and take sides. Like, some of these people like the Mistress Theron or Thurn, whatever her name is, seem to want them to do. And he takes us even further in kind of declaring that even on Coruscant, where the Jedi take base and are, around the general populace at all times, that most of them really see them as soldiers. And that's because he says our actions are a reflection of our purpose. So referring to how the Republic continues to use them as soldiers, even, as long as the Jedi keep saying yes and keep engaging in these battles, the Council can say and deny whatever they want about what their purpose is and what their intentions are. But at the end of the day, they're just weapons, right? Which speaks to the true lack of vision, I think, that the Jedi have at this point. And Qui-Gon, I think, he sees it, right? It's very transparent that they are losing that lack of vision. And he calls Yoda out on having a lack of vision, which, like, dang, I mean, freaking Yoda, he's calling him out right in front of him, saying the Jedi lack vision. Yoda doesn't really, say much to it, but
yeah, part of the
ballsy
problem.
of him.
Yeah, part of the problem. Servants of politicians was a great line, but you could see the struggle within Qui-Gon to understand it, but also his willingness to speak out. And again, this debate, but this is a healthy debate too, right? And Yoda barbs back a little bit. He says, there's certain aspects of Qui-Gon's argument that the Council would not agree with, particularly seeing as a weapon of the Republic,
right?
And perhaps even the Jedi seeing them as a weapon as well. And I think that's the part that Yoda specifically was talking about. That I don't think you're going to get agreement from the Council about that part. Mm-hmm. We're not down that path yet. But this was a good flavor. It gives you that tension that we've come to expect to see in these situations with Qui-Gon about why what is it that is so disagreeable between him and the Council that has restricted his progression amongst the ranks.
Yeah.
And so it was good to finally get a little flavor of that. And who better to have that with than Yoda? Because if it was Mace, it may have escalated. But with yeah, I mean, clear, honestly, right? And but with Yoda, no, you have a legit conversation and debate about the merits of really the Force and purpose. And that's what you would expect between two characters like these.
And so, because of that, Qui-Gon has some questions that he needs answers to. He feels like he needs to have these questions answered. And so he does. Qui-Gon, Qui-Gon does what Qui-Gon does. And he literally gets into a ship, has no idea where he's going to go. He just trusts in the Force that, one, it's going to set him on a course. And I think he makes a comment in there about that the Force doesn't, he's hoping that out of pure blind faith in the Force, that it doesn't send him into a star or something like that, right? So he just gets in a ship and takes off and doesn't know where he's going. And he arrives at some planet where he's going to,
doesn't even have a name.
Yeah, that's right. It didn't have a name. And, again, it's very similar to like Mortis and some of these other planets that we've seen, like where Yoda went and visited, and these really like Dagobah and all that, where there's a lot of life here. The Force is very strong. All's well. And then he starts to kind of feel something very wrong. He's, cold, some kind of a level of corruption, darkness, and it's starting to spread. And I guess to me, it's unclear if he was meant to stop the darkness or learn from it.
Right. And he questions it as much, right?
Right. Yeah. He questions it himself, right? And am I here to learn from this experience, or am I here to stop it? And then he kind of comes across this dark monument that's kind of buried in the middle of a tree here. And, Qui-Gon being Qui-Gon again, he decides to just trust in the living Force, and he just heads on in, goes right in there and goes into this dark place. And then he has this kind of a vision. And the vision is very interesting, especially artistically. I thought this was one of the better, the comics. I don't remember if it was the same artist for all three of them or not, but I did enjoy this one because the dark side, the way it was drawn was very interesting. It was very clear. You could tell where the dark side was coming from. And, it was kind of manifesting itself as these 5 Carnage. If you're a Marvel kind of character, it almost looked like Carnage, right? These 5 characters that look like humanoids that were kind of standing there, and they end up kind of encroaching in on Qui-Gon Jinn, and he pulls out his lightsaber and starts fighting them.
Yeah.
What's that?
Quick to action there.
Yeah. No, I mean, he doesn't even hesitate. He just immediately pulls his lightsaber out, starts going in, cutting them all up, cuts them down. And it's as these humanoids are laying there that the darkness fades from them, and they suddenly turn into these 5 figures, which look very much like Jedi, right? I think they don't really say it, but they look like 5 Jedi that he's just slain. And I think there's a level of symbolism here,
right,
that this is what the Jedi would eventually become, should they continue, as they have.
Right.
Yeah, and then because Qui-Gon killed them all, the darkness suddenly starts to consume him, and then it starts to kind of envelop him, and light finds a way through the darkness, and that's kind of where the balance aspect comes in there. It almost takes him over, and he's able to kind of fend it off, fight it off. It don't really explain a whole lot here. But yeah, I don't know with this. Let me just pause here.
Yeah, there's a bit to unpack there, huh?
Yeah, no. So yeah, go right ahead.
So when it gets there you talk about the symbolism and foreshadowing, when he gets to the planet and he talks about the corruption and the spreading, you can't help but think about the Clone Wars in particular, and the shadow that Palpatine and the Sith start to cast across the galaxy, right? So you start to get some of that symbolism there. And one of the other cool things just of note is that Qui-Gon is drawn very similarly to how Anakin, and it was Anakin in the Fortress Vader series when he enters the portal, very similar across his body. Of course, he's got all his parts, but very similar type of force vision or force type of experience, out of body experience. So I thought that was a really cool parallel between those between the books there as well.
Yeah, even the way it was drawn artistically, I thought was very similar,
very consistent.
Yeah.
Which I think that was really good. And again, this connectedness between them all, you just feel like they're all part of the same world. They're not completely off the wall. So the thing that he takes away from this scenario, though, is that violence sows seeds of the dark side. And basically that starts to come into where, if unchecked, then the Jedi would become that which we fight against. And again, that was very telling, because we know that's really exactly what happens. And the Jedi struggle with that throughout the Clone Wars, of understanding this quickness to battle, especially what we saw in Attack of the Clones, where they just accept an army and move forward, like we talked about over the last couple of weeks. This is sowing the seeds of the dark side, and he sees it so clearly. And when we talked about it before, of would Qui-Gon had made a difference if he had lived? And with this experience, you kind of think, yes, he would have made a difference. Would he have been able to stop Order 66 or something like that? Unclear. But would he have been able to see this trend and be able to reference this point? And the answer seems to be unequivocally yes, he would have.
I would agree.
Yeah. But again, a long time passes between this and Phantom Menace. So it's still a lot of questions as to why. And he even comes back when him and Yoda have kind of a debrief. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. That's the way of the Force, right? You get answers, but then you have a lot of answers or questions that surface as a result as well. Mm-hmm. But what happens in this time between? Like, why not? Did he share this vision? Did he share like the oath of the Jedi and their responsibility? And so those are other things that maybe we'll get in some other stories that help us understand what happens in between. But I thought this was very, very important lesson for Qui-Gon, and he's the one to hear it, and he's the one to listen to it, being as in tune with the living Force as he is, and that he was the right one. But now you get the frustration of, okay, why did this lesson not get learned across the rest of the Order? Yeah,
and this goes back to this. I don't want to dig it back up, but that question that I threw out in the last episode about whether or not, Order 66 could have been prevented, because this is another sign that someone knew something was happening, right?
Right.
That things were coming. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. But going back to, going back to the storyline, he breaks that darkness by, he just yells no. And then he gets this revelation that really balances truly what is needed here, what the Jedi need, what he needs, what Anakin needs, right? You can throw a number of things in here, but everything really kind of comes back to balance, which gives us the title of this particular issue. And then he goes back to the mistress back on the planet and tells her, hey, sorry, I'm not fighting this war for you. I can't do it anymore. You're going to, your opposition has a bunch of people that have now taken their side and they're kind of tipping the battle in their favor. You're going to have to do the same thing. And you're surrounded by a ton of people here on Coruscant who've been through this, done that. They've have a lot of experience. You're not unique. They've gone through all of this just like you have. Go find some people to ally with and bring balance to your situation again. And it seems like he's kind of passing the buck, but he's just, again, removing himself. You're safe. I've done my job. You're, as a peacekeeper, you need to go fight this war for you. I'm not going to do it for you.
Well, and he was trying to teach her a lesson as well. And him and Yoda talk about this lesson as well. So Yoda asks him, like I was saying a minute ago, Yoda asks him, did you find the answers you were looking for? And Qui-Gon says, yes, but of course, more questions. And Yoda says, good. Questions are good because arrogance leads to the dark side. And this goes to that learning and that knowledge that we've talked about over so many episodes, right? And then they get into another little debate again, which I thought was really good, where the rigidity, and I think this is applying to Mistress Thera as well. If you're too rigid, you can have the same effect. If you have yourself so firmly rooted in the ground to where you don't move and you don't learn and you don't compromise, which is what Qui-Gon told the Mistress there as well. You have to compromise, that you could end up in the same place. And he has a quote saying, "The tree that won't bend will snap with the wind," right? Which we've heard in all sorts of different scenarios, right? And fortune cookie type of things, right? And then Yoda, you have this, again, more rooted approach. Bend to the dark side, we must not. And of course, Qui-Gon's like, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, the dark side consumes, there's no balance of that. So what's our purpose? But it was just this really nice little tug of war here of you can be rooted in your values and your beliefs, but you can't blind yourself to that. And again, more foreshadowing and more
the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, it just speaks to it so clearly that Qui-Gon really had a good grasp of this. And it really makes me question, if he was on the council, would he have been in a better position to influence some of these decisions later on that he never had the opportunity to? Yeah. And not to get into what ifs, but I mean, that's the type of thing you start to see, was that of all of the Jedi that we've met, he seems to be the one in tune that would have been able to see some of this darkness and to help guide the Jedi. But the problem is the relationship doesn't seem to be there either, that he would have been able to have that effect on the rest of the council. Because even Yoda doesn't really want to, be all that flexible with some of this. He sees that as you're getting rid of your core values. You're letting that erode and chip away at it. Yeah.
And there's nothing in here that explicitly says this, but I got the impression that this was kind of a turning point for him with regards to balance. I think this is where he became a really true believer that balance was the way to go. And this is what led him to become so, become the champion for Anakin, right? He believed that Anakin was a chosen one, that he would bring balance to the Force. And having gone through this experience in this comic book, I think just reaffirmed that he needed to do whatever he could to ensure that Anakin got the Jedi training that he needed and felt like he deserved, so that he could bring balance to the Force. Right? He was trying to make sure that this prophecy was fulfilled, and I think it stems a lot from the experiences he had in this comic and what he went through on that planet.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things is that you see with Qui-Gon is that he's less concerned with being right or wrong. And he's focused on serving the Force and serving balance and doing what is best kind of cumulatively, serving the living Force. And that's such a great, it just personifies him perfectly with what we know. And I agree with you. I think this was a transition point for him to where, while he had lots of questions, I think his mental model of how things should work was very much formed right at this moment, and that this set his path forward of how he would behave and how he would address the Force, as well as how he would address the council, moving forward. So I agree with you. I think this was a very important moment for his development overall, but specifically how he was going to, commune with the Force, moving forward.
Cool. And that's really how it ends. It ends on that note. You get a snarky smile from Qui-Gon Jinn as he and Yoda are kind of throwing jabs at each other at the very end of it. But
yeah, and you get this visual of Coruscant in the background, trees framing it. So it's a little in your face there, but yeah, we get it. Balance. Yeah.
Right.
But this was a good story though. Again, not a lot, going on, but so many things you could talk about and get through it. I thought it was a really good story. And again, another one that Jody Hauser wrote, I thought very, very well. A couple things hard to follow specifically what they were intending, but overall you get it. And I think this is a really great story. And again, one that we have wanted to hear for a long time, and maybe not all the details of what we want to hear, but again, this is another great moment in time story that we're better for hearing.
I think we'll get more detail with Master and Apprentice.
Oh yeah. I think we're in for a good one there.
So that's going to do it for the coverage here. And we will come back and we want to do more of these as well. So I called this part 1 early on in the intro. We'll do a part 2. I don't know, maybe we'll do a part 3. We'll see how it all plays out, but we've got some more issues that we're still waiting for something for them to come out. So look for that sometime soon. But before we go, we've got some shout outs, and most of this is coming back from Mortis, which I think was really great. But what do we got for shout outs before we leave here?
There were too many to name them all, but it's just been overwhelming the amount of positive response and support we've had on social media, both to Mortis as well as Order 66. Some of the early feedback there has been really positive. So
yeah,
thank you everyone that continues to leave us feedback on not only on iTunes and the other media services, but through Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. We do read all of that. And then, of course, you've set up that voicemail number, and we're getting a lot of phone calls and voicemails that way with, and again, so many great comments, and we're even getting some interesting theories that we might come back to as we get into next week, possibly. I don't know, but thank you, everyone. The response has been amazing, and it really, it kind of warms our heart to hear it, and that we're fitting in the wheelhouse of what you like to hear and what you expect to hear from us. So thanks.
Yep. And just quickly, so Utini, Formalis, Cab, Aaron Baker, Josh from Kalamazoo, all of you guys have called the line, and we've got more in there that we'll probably use some of the questions from that on the next episode. So spoiler alert, episode 267 is going to be listener question time again. We've got a number of questions that we've queued up from social media, Discord, and now the Cantina Cast hotline. So you can look for that next week. If you guys want to give us a call, you can text us as well. It's 803-717-CAST. You can send an email to cantinacastfanmail@gmail.com. Or you can join us on Discord. We've got a little room, or what is it called? I don't know, whatever it's called.
Channel, yeah.
Channel, there you go. There's a channel there where you can ask some questions if you want, or if you'd like, just throw it in social media and we'll capture it there. So,
hey, and a very special thank you to Albert's wife, who called and left the message and called him a giant nerd.
Yeah.
That was the best thing I'd heard in a while.
Yeah, we'll play that here at some point on the show.
That's a good one.
She can have her 2 seconds of glory. All right. Anything else before we go?
No, thanks everyone. We will do listener feedback next week. Looking forward to that one.
Yep. All right, guys. We'll see you guys. Take care.
Bye.
You are a giant nerd.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.